Hello, everyone. Welcome to Just Love Inspires TV. We are so glad that you are here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so you can get an update every time there's a new video. And also share the video if you feel like it's going to help somebody. So I am so excited because I have a special guest today. I say that every single time, but you are really a special guest. This is John Gade. Did I say your last name precisely correctly?
It's God eye, like God
Got
and
I, got
I
I.
put
Come on,
together.
guys.
God
We need to learn how to pronounce things here. Okay, perfect. He's teaching me as I go. So John is a licensed mental health counselor, and we're going to be talking about a fairly heavy topic today. We'll jump into that in a moment. But before we do, John, can you share with the listeners a little bit about your specializations?
Yeah, by all means. So I'm fairly new to the counseling field, but I am a mental health counselor. I use an integrated approach, which is basically trauma informed. Been trained in EMDR, polyvagal theory, all these other things that probably don't might not make a lot of sense to the everyday person. But really, when it boils down to it, I try to find an approach that matches the needs and the personality of every client that I work with.
Awesome. I love that. And if you guys know me at all, you know that I am very much a fan of therapy and making sure that we work through our trauma and issues that we have. So I'm just so excited that you're here with us today. And just a little bit of a trigger warning for anybody. We are going to be talking about grief and some death. As a topic kind of wrapped together. And so just wanted to be sensitive to that, to anyone who's watching or listening. And also a trigger warning for suicide. So, all right, guys, so we're going to get started. And just so you know, if you see John and I sniffle or shed a tear, it's just because we've walked through some of these things. So if you feel so inclined, you can sniffle and tear right along with us. So, all right, so let's jump in. So, John, first of all, tell us what made you decide to become a counselor and want to help people in this way.
Oh wow. So that's a that's a loaded question in itself.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, Jessica, I moved to Arizona, the Phoenix metro area back in 2010 with the intent of going to school to become a counselor. And I was dealing a lot with a lot of spiritual just challenges in my life, and I basically became uh, your your modern day Jonah, and I ran in the other direction,
Okay.
only to be pulled back. You know, it took the pandemic for me to like really buckle down to my calling and to what God created me to be. And I'm so glad because I have 13 years of experience since 2010 to add uh, to being a mental health counselor. But really, what really instilled that desire within me is I attended the funeral of a young man who committed suicide at NAU, and I knew him. I saw him. He'd go to church, and I know how much he enjoyed music, and I was completely clueless about what he was going through, and I didn't want to leave somebody alone in the dark again. So this was kind of my way of redeeming myself, if you would say,
Sure.
in
Yeah.
the midst of knowing that about this young man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think that anytime you see that or you witness that, there are some of us that have, I would say, a calling that feel very drawn in the direction to want to help people who are suffering. And so I really applaud you for answering that call and for moving forward with your studies and getting into a position where you can help people on a professional level. So that's really wonderful. Um, so you had shared this with me previously. In 2020, you preached a sermon on spiritual bypassing, is what you called it.
Yeah.
Um, can you share with us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so spiritual bypassing, it's much like toxic positivity, but it's a tendency for someone to use spiritual ideas or practices in a way to avoid dealing with emotional challenges.
Mm,
And you see it happening in faith circles everywhere. You
yes.
see people like just really facing a difficult time, and instead of giving themselves an opportunity to feel the emotions that are present, they're like, you know, God will never give me anything that I can't handle, or the joy of the Lord is my strength, and they'll force a smile. And while it's great to have faith, and I applaud the effort, the reality is that we're human beings, and we're biologically designed by God to experience emotion, and we
Yeah.
even see that in the very life of Jesus. And I get stuck in the Gospels. I love to see Jesus getting angry and flipping tables, and uh, just seeing the human side of him as he cries at the loss of his friend. You
Mm,
know, he didn't come up with a quirky little quote. He just wept. The shortest verse in the Bible, and it's so profound. And
mm.
I get emotional right now just thinking about that. Is that in this lifetime we have the privilege of serving a savior, a Messiah uh, that was very much human like us.
Yeah. Whew, wow, I'm already getting emotional with you just sharing that. And yeah, and it's so true. I think it is really easy to over spiritualize things, even though they may be very spiritual in nature. It's not to take away from that reality, but I think we sometimes forget that there are two tensions, if you will, to hold. There's the emotional aspect, in biologically speaking, and then there's the spiritual aspect. And we have to walk through both. We have to learn how to
Yeah,
walk through both and attend to both. And, I totally agree with what you said. I think there are some circles where people are just kind of expected to grit their teeth, grit and bear it, put on a smile, walk forward, kind of faith it till you make it. I've heard that term
yeah,
thrown around too, which is kind of terrible. um, and I also, you mentioned one of the quotes. It's like kind of one of my pet peeves, which is people say something like, well, God will never put more on you than you can ever bear, or however they say that, which isn't even really biblical. So yeah, I think it's important to get in touch with the reality of what's really going on in your soul, and to not ignore that, and to take the time to really process it. I think our society is so on demand, so fast, so, you know, productivity driven, especially here in the US. And there is some value to that. Um, but what ends up happening is sometimes that overruns just the stillness and the Sabbath that God has asked us to take, to come away with him, right? To spend time with him. What has been your experience with that? Have you ever had any seasons where you feel like God is saying, okay, I need you to put this down and just come away with me and rest?
I to be honest, that's been a constant theme of my life. I started the conversation talking about being a modern day Jonah. It seems like that hasn't changed. It seems like God is always calling me to draw into um, deeper moments with Him. And I'm by nature I'm an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. Um, I mentioned I'm getting teary eyed, but I'm the kind of person that I'll cry if I'm watching Bambi. That's just who I am, and I've had to
Yeah.
embrace that I'm 100% masculine and 100% emotional at the same time. But I tend to carry the burdens of others quite often. And in doing that, there's just been seasons of life where God has called to me and said, now you have to enter into my rest.
Mm,
And I really experienced that this past year. Um, the past 2 years have, oh gosh, since since January of 2020 has just been a really difficult time for me. But this year, in a period of a month, I lost my mom, I lost my brother, and I lost my niece. And it was hard, very difficult. And I came to a place where I'd show up at work and I'd just stare at the computer screen. I was going full time, working on my internship to obtain my licensure as a therapist, and working the full 8 hour days. My days were usually about 14 hours long, but when I'd arrive at my full-time job, I just stare at the screen, and sometimes the phone would ring and the person would be on the line and I couldn't even respond back. And I had no other choice but just to take a break. I personally believe in having therapy, and my counselor told me that I was suffering from complex persistent bereavement disorder. I had lost 8 of my family members in the period of 2 years, and it became too overwhelming, and God's just told me you need a rest. And so I took a 90-day Sabbath just to work on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I just I can't even imagine. I can't fathom that. And I can just picture you sitting there staring at the computer, the phone's ringing, and it's like, how could you even be present and available to work with other people when you have this persistent, grief and just a tearing, at your soul constantly. It's unbearable almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can relate because in 2020, I lost my father to suicide. And it was complicated because I had a complicated relationship with my dad, but he didn't pass right away. He attempted suicide, and I watched him die for 5 days. That was hard. And I stuffed it for almost 2 years, throwing myself into work, working really, 12, 14-hour days. Started drinking a little more than I normally would, ate a lot more than I normally would. Life was really out of balance. I didn't really have a sure footing. I had also just recently moved. We had relocated to California at that time, and we were just starting to build a community and a faith family. And so even though we did have support around us, it wasn't as familiar as what we had had before. And so it was a really hard season. And I just remember I went on a leave of absence. And I just remember thinking, I don't think I can go back, because this pain is so multifaceted and so layered and so, charged with all these different things. And I need to really look at it, because my habit in the past was to stuff things, to disassociate, to use alcohol or food to try to numb or, numb the pain. And so, yeah, I realized I need to take some time and really unpack this and get into some good therapy and do some trauma recovery, because I was completely traumatized by how everything unfolded with my dad. And I don't think if someone hasn't been through that, if they've never actually watched someone die in such a gruesome way, it's kind of, and especially your parent, somebody that you love, it's really indescribable. Honestly, it's very indescribable. So yeah, there was a lot to unpack there. And so that was the Sabbath rest that I needed. and it actually ended up lasting longer than I thought it would. And so I've just been really grateful to God for that time and the way that he provided for me and my husband during that time. But in that way, I can completely relate to what you're saying about needing to, you have that moment where you're kind of disconnected and you realize I'm not really operating in like reality right now. I'm just going through the motions, and I need to listen to what my body is telling me and listen to what God is telling me, and I need to take a step back. So I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to do that. And 3 weeks is nothing, man. That's a miracle right there that you were able to go back after that time. So I'm so glad to hear that you had that. So
It
what
was
was that?
actually 90 days.
Oh,
I took,
sorry, you said 90 days.
yes,
I said 3 weeks. Okay, so yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so
So,
that's 3 months. That's great. That's so great. So what was that like when you came back?
um, so I had a lot of time to think and reflect during that time, and part of the thing that really made me struggle emotionally is the distance between my mother and I, and not emotional. My mom was like my pal, my best friend. Like I still struggle um, taking breaks because I used to call her during every break. Like we're just always talking. But uh, I lived 6 hours away from her, and so like I'd go months without seeing her. And during the pandemic, I my mother had chosen to not be vaccinated, which I completely honor her decision. But I was super fearful at her age that I would get her sick if I ended
Yeah,
up coming down with it. So I consciously made decisions to not go back and visit her. And if I could go back and do that over, I would have spent every second I could with her. So
yeah.
there's just a whole bunch of what ifs and a realization of where am I investing my time?
Mm,
Um, and I had to really uh, come clear with understanding that not everything that I was investing my time in was giving me the return on investment that I had hoped to get, and that was okay. It wasn't in any way for me to judge myself or to judge others, but it was information. And so I've stepped back from some things. I've jumped into some others. I've come clear um, with what I am willing to jump completely into. Uh, I'm clear about what it is that I don't want to participate in, and so whenever I had time to go back to work, um, well, we come from the same field, Jessica. We did the same type of work for a long time.
yes, we did.
It was just an understanding that that season was over. Like, and
Yeah.
so just grateful for the time, the relate, and more than anything, I'm a big relationship guy. So like the relationships that I developed there, and just so grateful for people that sewed into me. But that just isn't what I was born to do. I wasn't born to answer phones all day and
Hmm.
uh, dial the phone like a maniac.
And convince students that they needed a certain degree
Absolutely.
constantly. We used to work in the
Absolutely.
higher education world, in case anyone's wondering. So a little bit of counseling, a little bit of sales mixed in there. It was kind of an interesting combination, to
Everything.
say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you had that revelation and that turning point to be able to redirect. And there's, I, like you said, it wasn't like to judge or anything. It's just information.
Yeah.
I feel like there's value in every single season, whether we feel like we've conquered something or we haven't, or we're walking in our purpose or we haven't. God so graciously uses everything um, to to take us to where he wants us to go. And even if we're kind of living outside of maybe his, let's say, his best plan for us, he so graciously redirects our steps too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's important to know too, because I think sometimes people might think, well, I'm kind of stuck in this phase, or I feel stuck even in my own grief or my own pain right now. And I think it's important to mention that God has compassion towards that,
Absolutely.
and he can redirect you. He can, he can walk you through a healing process so he can get you to where he wants you to be. And it can, the information, let's say, that you've acquired during that time, can actually help you become more effective with whatever you're doing next. How would you say your experiences have shaped how you are and how you show up as a counselor now for other people?
Yeah. So I I feel as if there's a deeper sense of compassion. So I mentioned uh, that I'm an empath by nature. I'm a highly sensitive person, and I remember seeing. I'll give this as an example. I remember seeing you share your story about your dad online, and praying for you too, and crying, because
Oh,
I'm a crybaby, um, and there's pain in that. Like whenever I see people that are suffering, but going through the suffering yourself is a completely different experience.
yeah.
And so I had lost I had an elderly father. My father passed away at the age of 91 in 2007. I was
Wow.
his late life experiment.
Yeah.
So he was 61 whenever I was born. But whenever he passed, there was such an understanding of like my dad had this long, rich life that it was expected. It wasn't like darn,
It wasn't
like
a surprise
yeah,
because he
this
was towards the end
yeah,
of his life. Yeah.
yeah. So going through losing my mom the way that she passed, and um, my mom, she had caught COVID, and her lungs recovered beautifully. Uh, her mind left her.
Mm.
And there's something a lot of people haven't talked a lot about, but it's called COVID paranoia. And there's people that their response to the virus was creating this grandiose world that wasn't there. So I went from seeing my mother um, just being this loving person that had complete faith in God, that I could turn to prayer uh, for prayer in every aspect, to suddenly being so fear driven that that she was scared, and seeing things that weren't there, and uh,
Wow.
that was very difficult to do that. So going through that process of my own personal grief and trauma surrounding my mother's death gives me a different perspective. I had empathy with others previously, but now I have gone through a process of experiencing it myself. And so there is a different level of compassion that I now hold because I've been there. You don't know what it's like till you go through it.
You don't. You absolutely don't. And I think it's so, so easy. And we've all done this, to be on the outside and be like, you're not over this yet? Why are you still worried about this? Why is it still hurting you? You know, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, it's been 10 years, 20 years,
Uh,
whatever. Um, I think it's important for people to realize, and I'm sure you would agree with this as being a trained professional, that everybody has their own process,
yeah.
because they have different backgrounds. And if you've ever experienced trauma in any way, shape, or form prior, grief, in my experience, has a way of compounding that. Um, and so even just the loss of a loved one, especially a parent, or maybe if somebody's watching, they've lost a child or just a really close friend, um, that brings up stuff in you that you probably didn't even know was there. that now
So
you have to contend with, especially if there's a lot of history or complication, which was the case for me and my dad. And maybe even some guilt, some feelings of why couldn't I have been there more, like how you probably felt with your mom, like why didn't I, visit her more often? For me, with my dad, it was why couldn't I have helped him? Why didn't I reach out more? There's a lot there. There's a lot there to unpack, but the point is that everybody has their own variables to contend with in their own process. From a professional point of view, how do you work with that? How do you work with people so now you've had your own experience that's been really hard and painful, and now you're seeing someone else going through it and coming to you as a professional. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. But one of the most interesting things, and I think it's just the way that God orchestrates divine appointments, is the week that I ended up going on leave, I took the option to attend. It was a workshop, a webinar on. It was to become a certified clinical trauma professional, and they covered the topic of grief. And whenever you're dealing with grief, for the first year, the only thing that you can do to help somebody process grief is giving them a place to share their story and giving them freedom to feel. So I got that information, and that information was supposed to be for my clients, but I was like, heck, I'm running with this.
I need
Like,
it. Yeah.
like I am gonna share my story like shamelessly, and we're connected on Facebook. You see me always posting things, and that's
Yeah.
part of my healing journey. Is like I'm sharing stories of my mom, pictures of my mom. I ran across a cupcake recipe yesterday, and I posted the recipe today. I posted pictures of the cupcakes that I made, which are delicious, by the way.
Awesome. I wish you could pass me one through the screen. That would be amazing.
I totally would. I'm like, oh, because my mom was an amazing baker. But it's uh allowing, giving ourselves opportunity to share our story and our journey.
Mm.
And also, I've made a clear decision from that moment. I'm going to give myself permission to feel any emotion that comes my way. And there's been times where I just break down in sadness. Um, I'm chuckling right now because just remembering the other day, my wife and I were having a very passionate discussion.
Okay. Okay.
No, we had a disagreement about something, and we're having a serious discussion. And uh, she was sitting at the kitchen like counter there, and then behind her was my mom, and she was smiling. And it was funny because uh, I know that I had to be present for my wife. We had to work through a challenge that we were experiencing, but I could also honor every word of wisdom, every scripture she had taught me, every prayer she had prayed for me. Like I knew it was present there in that moment. And so I just allowed myself to experience love in that moment, which was something different for me that I haven't ever walked into grief and then like experience love. But I did in that moment. And it was so helpful as I was processing, my wife and I were talking through a challenge that we were experiencing. Um, but whatever emotion shows up, um, I'm giving myself permission to experience it. And because of that experience, that is what I encourage my clients to do as well.
Yeah. I love that. And again, kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier about society being so fast and on demand and just go, 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 go. We need that. We need to give ourselves permission and other people permission. Not that they need our permission, but sometimes, you need to say to somebody, it's okay, right, to feel what you're feeling, and show that empathy and not feel shamed for it, regardless of the timetable. I think that being in touch with your feelings, however you're feeling, is Um, at least for me, I can say that it's one of the most powerful experiences you'll ever have. And what you do, at least for me in that moment, is I try to be conscious of inviting Jesus into that moment with me.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think it's Dan Allender. He has
Love him.
oh, he's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. But he says something, I can't remember the exact words, but he says reality is where we encounter God. And sometimes the reality is that I have to confess, like I was very disappointed that I didn't see a miracle take place for my mom. Like I wanted to see her mind come back, and it didn't, and it led to her passing.
Mm.
Um, so there's that anger that in the process, you know, like I love you, Lord, but I'm very disappointed in your decision right now. You know, and you know, it's
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just commit blasphemy for thinking that? And I never forget, because I was a youth pastor for gosh, what was it, 8, 9 years in New Mexico, and one of my interns, I heard her telling one of the middle school girls that was experiencing doubt and frustration. She says, "You know what? God can handle your doubt. God could handle anything. Just share that with him."
Yeah.
And that stuck with me. That was a little message meant for a middle school kid, but that word of advice has stuck with me. I think it was 2008, 2009, whenever I heard it, and it's really left a mark in the way that I approach God.
It is so true. And yeah, just the mercy and the compassion of God. I think people underestimate that sometimes. And, you know, especially people, well, Christians, and then also people who haven't walked with God yet in their life, let's put it that way, yet. Um, maybe look at God as a little more distant, a little more cold, a little more judgmental. But it couldn't be farther from the truth. Because of Jesus, there's so much compassion and meeting us in those moments. We just have to be open to inviting him there in our pain and walk with him, which is a process. So that kind of leads me to my last question, John, which is, what would be your advice if someone's walking through this season right now of grief and loss? What would you say to people who are struggling right now?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the same thing, is just allowing yourself to feel what is present and to not judge it. Um, we have a tendency to, um, well, first of all, the what is culturally sound is we have to be strong. And whenever someone dies, that's probably one of the last things that we need to do. We need to allow ourselves to be weak, because whenever we're weak, we can turn to Jesus. When we're weak, we can turn to one another for comfort. Whenever we, we're real, that's whenever we can take the medicine that is needed for the season. And our emotions, our feelings are nothing more than a biological response to what is taking place around us. So they're not something to fear. They're not something to judge. And so I just encourage people, feel.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Mm.
So how do people get in touch with you really quickly if they want to touch base with you and talk to you about potentially working with you?
Yeah, by all means, if someone is in the state of Arizona and is looking for mental health counseling, I do telehealth, and I do in-person visits in Gilbert, Arizona. CooperCounselingCenter.com is the best way to get a hold of me. If you're outside of the state of Arizona, I am also a life coach, a self-awareness coach. You're more than welcome to reach me. The best way to contact me or follow my story is on Instagram at the.john.eli.
So we'll post all of that information for everybody to connect with John. And I just want to thank him so much for sharing his heart and his expertise with us today. I so enjoyed this conversation. Guys, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this with somebody who may need this encouragement today. Again, John, you're such a blessing. Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Jessica.
And
Amen.
guys, we'll see you next time on Just Love Inspires TV.
I'm free falling in your love. I'm free falling.